Hello there folks, it's Scott once again and welcome to another video. This time I'm wrapping up the second Airplane film, Airplane 2, the sequel as it's called. The film came out in '82 and instead of the Zucker brothers and Jim Abrams returning, they had no involvement at all in the sequel. And going by the the crew and the cast here on Wikipedia, the new director and writer is actually Ken Finkleman. Earlier that year in '82, he actually wrote the infamous sequel Grease 2, which didn't do it. Which had a major decline in the box office. That film only made like $15 million against its $11 million budget. This movie did a little better. This movie actually had a $15 million budget and made around $27 million, which is at least better compared to Grease 2, but still nowhere near the amount that the original made. So there was some major box office declines. And I saw this film on YouTube. I don't really own this film on any kind of physical media, but it is on DVD and Blu-ray. As I mentioned earlier, on Blu-ray it's with the double feature with the original. But anyway, you slice it. I was able to rent it on YouTube for around $4. Saw it on HD. Looked pretty decent. It definitely did not have any artifacts. The picture looked pretty clear, as it would if you were to buy the physical copy. And while maybe the sequel is, a step down, I still enjoyed the film. It still had the sarcasm. It's basically the same, satirical air disaster type film. Even though technically, it was the first film was more of a satirical. It was basically the same thing as satirical air disaster type movie, but that dealt with the plane. But this time it deals with the shuttle aspect and going into space. And this movie still had the running visual gags and the puns and everything, you name it. So anyway, and it's some interesting noteworthy references. Like it references some of the science fiction films of the past, like Battlestar Galactica, even Star Wars, and hell, even Star Trek. In fact, I'll get to the cast. Robert Hayes returns as Ted Stryker. Julie Hagerty returns as Elaine Dickinson. Lloyd Bridges returns as Steve McCrosky. And the one actor, Steven Stucker, returns as Jacobs. Basically the same character. And you also have, who else? You have one of the actors that play the Jive Brothers. I forget what his name is. I don't know, but I believe he comes back. And then apparently, I don't know if I mentioned his name. Oh yeah, Peter Graves returns as Captain Clarence Overe. And Lee Bryant, that's the Miss Hammond guy, the one that always would hysterical, and she says she's got to get out of there, and she freaks out, and she gets slapped by so many people. I forgot to mention that was another funny scene I liked in the original one. She comes back in a flashback, but I'll get to that eventually. But anywho, the new cast members are Chad Everett as Simon Kurtz, who's Elaine's supposedly going to be new husband. Rip Torn, the late Rip Torn, as Bud Kruger. John Denner as the commissioner. Chuck Connors as the Sarge. Kent McCord as Unger. And you have Sonny Bono, the late Sonny Bono, as the bomber. Joe Salucci. Who else? How can I forget? William Shatner. He comes in as Commander Buck Murdoch, who formerly has a past with Ted Stryker. And then, believe it or not, Raymond Burr as the judge. Apparently, he's most notable for playing Perry Mason or something like that back in the late 80s to early 90s. And, some other interesting little cameos, like Pat Sajak appears as a Buffalo anchorman and that sort of thing. So, yeah. So, you got a noteworthy cast here. So, basically, I'll talk a little bit about the plot and basically my thoughts, the pros and cons of the film. You know the drill. But anyway, this time the sequel takes place in like the near future. The moon has been colonized, and it supports a station on its surface. And this time They have intergalactic, traveling, like a lunar shuttle known as the Mayflower one. It's being rushed to launch from Houston, and while that's going on, the actor that plays the Sarge, which is Chuck Connors, he's not exactly for it, but he defers to the airline's management, which I believe is Rip Torn's character, and I believe it's probably John Denner's character. So basically, the flight crew are getting the flight crew is basically Clarence Oyvars, which is his return is coming as he comes back, of course. And of course, you have a new additional officer, Dunn, and also you have Elaine Dickinson being the computer officer this time. And apparently, once again, Elaine and Ted Stryker have now broken up officially. They've kind of explained that, but now she's involved with one of the members of the flight crew, Simon Kurtz. And apparently Ted has been committed to an insane asylum. He was pretty much declared mentally incompetent in a lawsuit, that basically following a test flight that he piloted on the lunar shuttle that crashed. And according to Ted, even though he's been sentenced to the institute, he believes the lawsuit was used against him to silence him because he knew there were some problems with the shuttle itself, and that made it unsafe. And apparently he's still hunted by the actions in the war, and apparently it's interesting how the sequel kind of expands on this. Apparently it's been called Macho Grande. He pretty much lost his entire squadron, but yet despite all that, somehow he's able to read the news about the upcoming shuttle launch, and he eventually escapes the asylum and is able to buy a ticket and able to get on board the flight. He tries desperately, to try to, warn Elaine about the events, and of course Elaine dismisses that, along with Simon, warning Ted to back off pretty much. And then eventually, while they're in flight, the Mayflower 1 suffers a short circuit, causing, the artificial intelligent computer called ROK to go insane, and basically to send the ship toward the sun. And one of the flight crew members, Unger and Dunn, try to deactivate the computer, but they're blown out of the airlock, and even Over tries to stop Rock, or I thought they were saying Rick, but let's see if they actually give a voice of that character. No, they don't. Anyways, Over tries to stop the computer, but unfortunately the computer gasses him instead, and then Simon believes it's time for them to actually abandon the plane, and Elaine's in shock and dismay, and so she decides she's had enough of him, and eventually she attempts to convince Ted to pretty much save the day, but it's not all easy. He has to figure out how to make the computer relinquish control. So they eventually come back to Steve McCrosky, which is Lloyd Bridges' character, the air traffic controller that reveals, who tries to do his best to calm the situation as possible. But he also reveals that apparently a passenger by the name of Joe Lucci had boarded the Mayflower 1 with a bomb in the briefcase, intending to commit suicide so that his wife can collect on the insurance money. And they eventually have a tag of war where Ted managed to get the bomb away from Joe, mainly thanks to a dog named Scruffs, I think is his name. And then Ted gets the idea to blow up the computer with that bomb, and so it can divert their course from the sun and set course for the moon as originally intended. So while he's able to use the bomb, and it causes the computer to crash, or basically using the bomb to destroy the computer, causing some damage to the shuttle. And unfortunately, the flight's not out of danger yet. So on the way to the moon, McCrosky is able to connect Stryker to Buck Murdoch, who has apparently had a past with Ted and a high level of contempt, because of Macho Grande. But of course, he agrees to help anyway, which is Shatner's character. So they're able to figure out some ways, like they have to use a bobby pin to shorten out the thing, and eventually, they manage to land back on the moon, and he's able to safely land the shuttle on the moon, and somehow, despite the act of bravery, Ted and Elaine fall back in love, and apparently they are married at the end and have a wedding of somehow. And this is all because of no atmosphere, so yeah. And then apparently the the Joe Salucci guy goes back in the cockpit and asks for his briefcase back, and that's how it ends. But there's actually an early post-credit scene where it shows us at the screen coming from Paramount Pictures, Airplane 3, and it apparently has Shatner's character Murdoch saying, "That's exactly what they'll be expecting us to do." Unfortunately, there were no sequel that came about because the film didn't do as well. So overall, I think for the most part it's a fairly decent sequel. Yeah, there are some flaws, and I think I'll get to that. I felt like it was an unwise decision to break up Elaine and Ted yet again, because and the fact that the plot's somewhat recycled because he has to try to win her back, and by the end he does eventually win her back, just a bit differently. So it seems like it sort of rehashes that plot, and I felt like, I wish they could have done something better with it. Like maybe they could have still been together, but they are put to the test to some degree, even if it's a comedy or a satirical one, but maybe they would do something along those lines. But I just felt like it was the same thing again in the first one. But and I felt like even though it was interesting to use some of the whatchamacallit music, the Battlestar Galactica music. It was kind of weird and felt out of place at times, but it was nice to reference it. But I don't know, some things seemed repetitive, even though it was somewhat funny. Like, for example, there was this one scene where Lee Bryant's character comes back as Miss Heyman, where she's the hysterical lady that loses control, and there's like this line that forms about where they're like telling her to control herself, and they all slap her, and then one person like in the original, that was one of the funny scenes where apparently Leslie Nielsen's character even goes over there and tells her to come down, slaps her, and then right before he leaves, he slaps her again, and apparently a nun goes down there and tells her to calm down, slaps her, and then apparently there's more people in line just waiting to get a taste of her, and even some guys are holding some bats and whatnot, like belunged objects, and the same thing kind of happens again. Even the judge is getting a crack at this, telling her to calm down, and slaps her, and a line starts to form again. So it was kind of funny, but it seemed a bit repetitive. So I think the main problem is that at times it tends to repeat itself, and maybe I don't know. Maybe some of the humor seems rehashed, but some of the humor still worked. Like whenever Ted Stryker escapes from the asylum, he is able to jump over the wall, and there's literally a spotlight that that shines on him, but it still is following, like it follows him, and then he runs into like one of the like a wannabe senior type, and then of course whenever he gets off a truck and into the airport or the shuttle station, someone takes a photo of it, and apparently the photo reveals that apparently a madman has escaped. So yeah, and then apparently there's this part wherever apparently whenever that one character, the captain, Peter Graves' character, he has another conversation with another kid where apparently that kid played by Oliver Robbins as Jimmy, he starts to, the captain starts to, handle the dog, and he's like, "Hey Jimmy, have you ever had a dog that come up on your leg and just hold on to you and just never let go and just rub on you?" Asking those freaking questions, and apparently, oh yeah, it's just, yeah. And then apparently, whenever Lloyd Bridges comes back in and he's trying to tell everyone he's needing stuff pronto, and and then he interacts with Steven Stucker's character as Jacobs. He's like, "Jacobs, give me everything that you know up to now." He's like, "Well, the Earth cooled, and then the dinosaurs warmed, but they got all fat and ugly, and they turned into oil, and then the Arabs brought the Mercedes and stuff like that." I fortunately can't remember all the Steven Stucker scenes. Whenever he was there, he had his moments for sure. Gosh, I wish I remembered what it was that made me laugh in those scenes. The dinosaurs reference one was kind of funny. So yeah, maybe if I look them up, see if I can look them up. Yeah, but he was back. I can't remember every one of them, unfortunately. But there was the one scene where they were, whenever the shuttle was going haywire, where they're telling her the bad news, where apparently we're off just a tad in space about our flight, about the flight navigation, and one of the guys or one of the passengers asked, "What's a tad?" And she's like, "500,000 miles," and the one of them said, "Oh, that's not so bad." And also, we're out of coffee, and they all start to panic, like they all start to beat up on each other. There's wrestlers beating up on each other, and then apparently, there's even a sign that flashes, "Don't panic," and then it switches back to, "Okay, panic." And then the light still continues on where Elaine's saying, "Everyone calm down, the flight is under control," and it starts flashing bullshit. And he's like, and she said something else, and then it flashes unbelievable bullshit. And then eventually, whenever the computer starts to go haywire, it makes little references to 2001, where the computer goes haywire. They'll be like, "What do you think you're doing, Dunn?" I think even one of the characters' name was David. He's like, "What do you think you're doing, Dave?" And then that's when the computer, is able to manually, automatically unlock the airlock and jettisons out in space. And then when the captain tries to do it, "What do you think you're doing, Captain?" And then the computer attempts to gas him. And then whenever the captain has to talk to Elaine, and he can't really talk, but he has to point to the computer, and she's like, "Rock gassed you?" And she's like, "Oh my god, I got it." And then apparently, whenever they have to, whenever Ted's able to somehow, gosh, I can't remember. I can't believe I remember. I can't remember that. He has to somehow. He's able to get the shuttle turned around, and then when they go into warp 0.5, it goes into full speed. And when during the time where Elaine's sitting in the chair, Stryker tells her, "Wherever we're going, Elaine, we're going where no man has gone before." And apparently she appears with sunglasses and smoking a joint. Oh wow! And then apparently I think the funnier scenes is when Lloyd Bridges comes in. I mentioned this, but now I forgot to add on to it. There's apparently whenever he comes in, where he's trying to remember Ted Stryker, and he's like Stryker, and apparently it looks like he's talking to one of the flight members, and the guy just shrugs and he just punches this woman out. But yeah, just overall some nice fun gags and some nice little references. Okay, the biggest one I think what really was great about this was throwing Shatner in, and they do this little gag where apparently whenever the doors open and close, or right before they would open, one of the crew members would go shh, and then when the door opens, it goes shh, and then when the guy goes in the one room, he goes shh again, and then shh, it does that. They reference the sounds and all that. But anyways, they just use the shh word on each time they want to open and close the doors, and that's when the door makes that sound. So it's kind of funny. Then one of the one of the crew members, goes to Murdoch, where they talk about, the danger that the Mayflower One has suffered. It looks like Shatner's in this viewing type of room, or in this viewer, and he's like, "We got to go to the Brit." He's like, "Got to go to the tower." And he's like, "Sir, there's no tower." And he's like, "No tower, just a bridge, sir." And then Murdoch's like, "Why in the hell am I not notified of these things?" And then when he opens it, it's just him in that room. That just the viewer made it look like he was somewhere in a different part of the base or something. And apparently, when it's funny, whenever when we see the lunar the air base itself, there's like sounds of a coyote and stuff like that, even though there's like no atmosphere whatsoever. And then when Murdoch's talking to one of his crew, he's talking about Yeah, he knows these lights are blinking out of sequence, and then Murdoch tells him to get him to blink in sequence and stuff like that. And there's like this, they can't figure out for the life what these machine or what these lights represent, and he's like, figure it all out. And then when he sees, whenever someone hands him Ted Stryker's record, it's not the paper type record, but it's like a polka dot record that he's done, apparently a musical record, and he's like, oh my God, it's worse than I thought. And then whenever Ted and Murdoch are talking, he's like, Stryker, you gotta find a piece of metal and shove it in there. And he's like, oh, come on, Stryker, it's not that hard. I can't figure out what these lights that are blinking and flashing, they're blinking and flashing and blinking and flashing. And then he's all cool and calm, and even when the shuttle crashes like right through the main bridge and whatnot, everyone gets out of there, but apparently Shatner's character is in his chair to not even facing it, and he doesn't even know what's going on because he's too busy talking to Stryker. It's just funny how it's just he doesn't even notice that. Even when the damage is all falling down on him, it's funny. But yeah, anyway, I wish I could remember all the other stuff that made this film funny. Oh yeah, whenever Sonny Bono's character actually goes by in the airport, and he's able to just go in the airport and actually buy a bomb. There's like several other things there, like rockets and whatnot. And then apparently even earlier in the film, whenever people are going through security, there's actually this guy who's dressed as a soldier, has a whole bunch of these weapons. So yeah. So I can't quite remember what, made this movie, as funny, but it still had its overall good, intentions. It's harmless. There's no whole bunch of fart jokes. But anyway, slice it. It still had, it still had some of its heart. It still had the humor. I still like how it made some of the notable references. Like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this one scene whenever he's trying to look through the ship through this periscope, and he's like, numero uno, irony can be pretty ironic. The head cheese, and then when he looks closer, you see like the footage of the original Enterprise of the Constitution class from the TV series. He's all surprised by it. So yeah, I felt like whenever Shatner came in, he was doing his best to keep the humor on another level, because apparently after Lloyd Bridges was telling how Ted Stryker had guts and all that, and he's like, it's even bigger than the colon or the intestine, whichever one it was. But yeah, it was hilarious. But yeah, anyways, while the film may seem a bit repetitive times and maybe the humor wasn't quite as great, it still was fun. It's still entertaining, and I definitely have seen far worse sequels that that weren't as funny. I can't really think of it at the top of my head, but hey, Airplane 2 is definitely not a bad film. I mean, yeah, not quite as classic as the original because of the lack of the Zucker brothers and Abrahams, sorry. But it was still a fun sequel, and I liked the scientific references. It just seemed the main problem with the sequel is that it had a bit too had certain repetitiveness to it, and just wasn't quite as funny, but it still entertained the hell out of me. And I think it's definitely worth a rental if you want to check it out. And yeah, so yeah, I think I pretty much said what I needed to. Give this movie a chance. I think you'll still be entertained. Just don't expect it to be the greatest comedy of all time. So yeah. Anywho, I think that's going to do it for me. As for what other reviews, I haven't decided what they'll be, but hopefully they'll be coming up soon. So stay tuned, on the lookout for that. Okay, I will see you later, folks. Later.